The silent forest of Orpheus. Far from the noise of cities, beyond the reach of crowded roads and busy minds, there lay a forest. It was an ancient forest, where the trees stood tall and wise, their branches whispering secrets only the wind could understand. Mist rolled gently over the ground each morning, like a soft blanket tucking in the earth for one more day of rest. On the edge of this forest, half hidden among mossy stones and flowering vines, stood a modest cottage. Nothing about it called attention, not its size, nor its shape, but every day, from within its wooden walls, rose the sound of music, not loud, not demanding, just there, soft, lingering, patient. It was the music of Orpheus. He lived alone in that quiet home, waking with the sun, sleeping with the stars. He did not seek company, for his lyre spoke all the words he needed. Its strings, when touched by his fingers, hummed with emotions too deep for speech, sadness that had no name, joy that needed no cause, longing as ancient as the sky. He would sit beneath the trees, where the light dappled through the leaves like golden lace, and play. Birds would fall silent. Deer would draw near, their breath held still. Even the wind paused, as if not to disturb the melody. And Orpheus, with closed eyes and a calm heart, would let his music flow. It was said, the rocks themselves leaned in to listen, that the rivers changed course to carry the sound. But Orpheus never played to impress. He played because the music was a part of him, like breath, like heartbeat, a quiet companion through the long hours of solitude. His days passed like this, slow and steady, like the rhythm of waves on a sleeping shore. He played not for fame, but for stillness, not to be heard, but to feel. And so the forest grew to know him, the quiet man with the golden lyre and the faraway gaze. The animals came to recognize his steps. The trees knew the pressure of his back as he leaned and rested beneath them. Even the stars above, it seemed, had memorized his lullabies. There was peace in his life. Not joy, not sorrow, just peace. And that peace was all he needed. Until the day the silence was broken by another set of footsteps. Soft, deliberate, lighter than his. Almost hesitant. Orpheus, seated on a mossy rock, paused his playing. He lifted his gaze through the dappled light. There, walking slowly through the tall grass, her hand brushing the petals of wildflowers as she passed, came someone unfamiliar, a figure the forest did not yet know. A woman, and though the forest still stood, though the breeze still danced, something had shifted. Orpheus felt it before he understood it. A quiet string inside him, one he had never touched before, vibrated gently, like the prelude to a song not yet written. Her name, he would learn it later, was Eurydice, but in that moment, she was simply a presence, a breath, a change, and the silence that had once cradled him so gently began to stir with something new. Not loud, not chaotic, but alive. And as the sun dipped lower behind the trees, casting longer shadows and softening the world into twilight, Orpheus watched her disappear behind the trees, not knowing, not yet, that his music would never sound the same again. The first meeting. The days that followed were like dreams half remembered. Orpheus returned to the same spot beneath the trees, his lyre resting against his chest, his fingers poised, but the notes came slowly now. They did not rise of their own accord as before. Something inside him was listening, waiting. Each bird call, each rustling branch, felt like a sign. Each whisper of wind, a message. And then, on the third morning, just as the dew was still clinging to the leaves, she came again. Eurydice. She moved through the forest as if she belonged to it. Her presence as natural as the sunlight filtered through green. She did not speak, nor did she flinch at the sight of Orpheus. She only looked at him gently, curiously, and then, without a word, sat upon a nearby stone. Orpheus did not ask why. He did not ask who she was, or from where she came. He simply played. The notes flowed again, quietly at first, hesitant, like shy words between strangers, but then fuller, warmer, more certain. It was not a song he had played before. It was a melody being born in that very moment, shaped by her nearness, by her stillness, by the soft pull of her gaze. Eurydice closed her eyes and listened, and in that silent exchange, music and breath, presence and stillness, something passed between them, something wordless and slow, like roots touching far beneath the earth. The forest watched in its quiet way. The foxes kept their distance. The birds held their songs. Even the streams seemed to slow, letting their waters glide without sound. They met again the next day, and the day after. No promises were made, no declarations whispered, but in the space between them, something bloomed. They would walk sometimes, among the moss and wild thyme, past pools so still they mirrored the sky. Orpheus would carry his lyre, and Eurydice would gather petals in her fingers, turning them slowly, as if reading something in their shape. When he played, she would close her eyes. When he stopped, she would smile, not with her lips, but with her whole being, like the forest itself had sighed. And so passed the weeks, a gentle, golden time, neither rushed nor delayed, as if the hours had laid themselves down, flat and open, for them to walk upon. In the quiet, between songs, they shared stories, small ones, of childhood dreams, of strange birds seen in winter, of the way the moon looked through different trees. Eurydice spoke little, but each word she offered felt like a secret uncovered. Orpheus listened, storing them the way a tree stores sunlight. He began to play differently. Not louder, not faster, just deeper. Each note now carried her within it. Each chord held the shape of her silence, her laughter, her steps in the grass. And though the world remained unchanged, though the seasons moved as they always had, Orpheus felt himself shifting, no longer a man apart from the world, now, somehow, part of its rhythm. The forest seemed warmer now, the stars, closer, even the wind, softer in its passing. And one evening, as dusk fell slowly, they sat side by side on the edge of a meadow. The sky above them faded from blue to rose, from rose to gray. Eurydice leaned her head gently on Orpheus' shoulder, and he did not move. He simply breathed in, and out, and in again, and let the moment become a memory he would carry forever. Days of quiet joy. The days that followed were quiet, not in silence, but in softness, the kind of quiet that wraps itself around you like a warm blanket in winter. Orpheus and Eurydice had no need for plans. They met each morning as the forest began to stir, as birds stretched their wings, and tiny insects brushed dew from the tips of grass. There were no schedules, no meetings to keep, no questions of time. Their world moved not by clocks, but by rhythm, the rhythm of a melody, shared between two hearts, the rhythm of two sets of footsteps side by side, weaving gently through sunlit groves. They spoke sometimes, yes, but even silence was full between them, full of meaning, full of breath, full of music. When Orpheus played, he did not look at her. He looked at the sky, or the curve of a tree branch, or the way the breeze caught her hair and turned it into golden threads. His music had changed. It no longer drifted aimlessly through the woods. Now, it settled softly in her lap, like a bird returning to its nest. And when she laughed, low and sudden and sweet, the trees seemed to lean in, just a little. They walked often, not far, but wide, tracing slow loops through the quiet forest. They followed forgotten trails, passed beneath ivy-draped arches of stone. Sometimes, they stopped just to sit, side by side, not speaking. Eurydice loved to lie in the tall grass and watch the clouds move. Orpheus would play beside her, slow notes, spaced far apart, long rests between each chord, like deep breaths. Even the animals seemed calmer now. Birds nested nearby without fear. Rabbits hopped past their feet. A fox once followed them for nearly a mile, before vanishing again into fern and shadow. The forest, it seemed, had accepted them, not as visitors, but as part of its own breathing body. And there were evenings. Sweet, slow evenings. After the sun slipped down behind the distant hills, the sky turned to a soft blue-gray. A hush would fall, not silence, but the kind of stillness that welcomes dreams. They would sit outside the cottage, wrapped in a single blanket, Eurydice resting her head against his chest, Orpheus plucking at his lyre gentle notes, almost humming, and above them, the stars blinked into place. There was no fear in those days, no urgency, only the weightless drifting of hours. Like leaves on a slow-moving stream, Orpheus did not think of the future. He did not wonder how long this peace would last. For what is time to a man who plays to the sky, and what is fear to a woman who listens with her whole soul? In the world they had created, soft, small, and complete, there was only now, and the now was enough. The shadow beneath the daylight. It began, as all changes do, quietly, so quietly that neither Orpheus nor Eurydice noticed it at first. The light still came each morning, soft and golden. The trees still stirred with wind. The forest still sang its green lullaby. And yet, something shifted. A hush deeper than usual lingered between the trees. Not unfriendly, not yet, but watchful. Orpheus felt it in the pauses between his notes, as if the music hesitated, as if some hidden chord within him waited and listened. But he said nothing, and Eurydice smiled as always. So the days went on, soft as ever. They laughed, they lay in the grass, they chased shadows and sunlight across the hills. Then, one morning, Eurydice didn't meet him at the stream. He waited. The breeze moved gently, shaking loose a petal that drifted into the water. He waited longer. A deer passed near, pausing to drink, unboated still. No sound of footsteps, no rustle of her dress against the grass. He walked to the place where she often picked wildflowers, a small hill where thyme and lavender grew thick. There he found a garland, half-woven, her handiwork, abandoned on beside it, footprints, hers leading down the other side of the hill. He followed them without thought, his lyre in hand, his breath steady. It was nothing, he told himself. She had wandered, perhaps chasing a bird, or drawn by the scent of blossom. But the forest grew quiet as he walked. Too quiet. Even the birds had stilled. Even the trees, it seemed, no longer whispered. And then, in a clearing choked with tall grass, he saw her, lying still as stone. No marks on her skin, no wound, only silence and stillness. And time, suddenly frozen. A snake, startled by his approach, slithered away into the brush. Its trail was the only sign of what had passed. He dropped his lyre, knelt beside her. She looked like she was sleeping, as if any moment her breath would return, soft and slow. He waited and waited, but the stillness did not break. He held her hand until the stars came out. He did not cry. He did not scream. He only sat as the chill of night began to settle into the soil, as the forest, confused and grieving, tried to understand what had changed. And in the silence that followed, something inside Orpheus, something deep and buried, broke. Not like a crack, not like a shatter, but like a string snapping under. Too much tension, with no sound, no warning, just gone. The forest held its breath, and Orpheus, for the first time in his life, did not play. The descent, time, after that day, became a fog. Orpheus wandered the forest, but the trees no longer sang. The paths he once knew grew unfamiliar. His lyre, once so warm beneath his hands, felt distant. It made no sound unless he forced it, and when he did, the notes were cold. He did not cry. not in the way others might. But each breath he took felt hollow, each moment quieter than the last. Days blurred into evenings, and evenings into dawn. He would wake with the birds, walk as far as his feet would carry him, and sleep beneath the stars without dreams. But within him, deep and still, something had begun to grow. It was not anger, nor defiance. It was love, sharpened by loss, drawn into a single, fragile thread of hope. And one morning, with mist rising over the earth like memory, Orpheus picked up his lyre again. He ran his fingers across the strings once, twice, and a sound emerged, thin, aching, but alive. He stood. He did not tell the forest where he was going. He did not pack, nor wear a cloak, nor seek a blessing from gods or men. He simply walked, beyond the groves he had known, beyond the hills, where he and Eurydice had once wandered, beyond the edge of things, toward the world beneath. The path was not marked, but Orpheus did not need a trail. Grief was his guide, and music, however faint, was his compass. He walked through lands where no birds flew, where the trees bent low, as if listening to sorrow. He crossed rivers where the water whispered the names of the lost. At last, he came to the mouth of a cave, dark, open, breathing cold air from its depths. There were no guards, no warnings, only stillness, and the faint echo of footsteps far below, not his own. Orpheus stepped inside, and the world of light fell away behind him. The underworld was not fire and screams. Not at first. It was quiet, like the forest at night, but deeper, like being beneath the sea. The walls pulsed with damp silence. The air was heavy, filled with things not seen, and yet he walked, his lyre cradled in his arms like a child, his breath steady, his purpose clear, down and down and down, through halls of shadow, through valleys of stone, past pale spirits that drifted like smoke. They did not touch him. They only watched, recognizing the sorrow that clung to him like fog. He played, sometimes gentle chords to calm the silence, and the dead listened. Some wept, some smiled. Even here, in the land of endings, his music reached. He passed through the gates of sleep, where dreams fluttered like moths. He crossed the river Lethe, whose waters stole memory, but Orpheus did not drink. He carried memory like a torch. Finally, he stood before the great stone doors. Beyond them, Hades waited, and Persephone, with eyes full of twilight. Orpheus did not tremble. He did not kneel. He played, not for mercy, not for glory, but for love. The music rose, soft as mist, fragile as morning light, and even in the depths of the world, even before gods of shadow and silence, Orpheus' music bloomed like a flower in the dark. The river of shadows. The doors before him were immense, ancient stone carved with names long forgotten. They did not open with a creak, nor a crash. They simply parted, as if they had been waiting for him. Beyond them, a vast chamber lay silent. The air was thick, like dusk made solid. Nothing moved. At the far end, 2 thrones of black marble rose from the ground, like teeth from the jaw of time, and seated upon them, still as statues, quiet as the dark, were Hades and Persephone, the king and queen of the underworld. Hades' eyes were deep, not cruel, but filled with the weight of all endings. Persephone's gaze was softer, green, like moss beneath snow, with a sadness that bloomed rather than broke. Orpheus did not speak. Instead, he stepped into the stillness and lifted his lyre. His hands, though cold, did not tremble. His fingers found the strings without thought, and he began to play. The sound echoed gently through the great chamber, not loud, not demanding, but honest, a melody born of love, of loss, of the simple, fragile beauty of a hand held in the sunlight. He played not only what had been, but what could have been, waking beside her each day, sharing words over quiet meals, watching her brush her hair in the golden light of evening. He played her laughter, her footsteps, the way she tilted her head when listening. And then he played the silence that came after. That long, stretching silence when he called her name and no answer came. The underworld held its breath. The spirits paused in their drifting. The rivers stilled in their flow. Even the fates, who weave and snip the threads of all lives, lowered their hands for a moment. When the final note fell into silence, it was like the last snowflake landing on a still winter field, and for a moment, nothing moved. Then Persephone spoke. Her voice was quiet, like a wind through autumn leaves. "You have brought sorrow into our halls," she said, "but also beauty." She turned to Hades, whose eyes remained unreadable, and Hades, the keeper of all that ends, spoke in a voice that echoed without sound. "Take her," he said, his words heavy with finality. "Lead her back. But do not look behind you, not once, not for sound, not for shadow, not even for breath. If you turn to see her before you reach the world of the living, she will be lost, forever." Persephone nodded once, and in her eyes was the faintest glint of mercy. Orpheus bowed, not in fear, but in gratitude. Then, from the shadows behind the thrones, Eurydice appeared, pale as starlight, silent as dawn. She did not speak, but her presence struck him like the first note of a long-forgotten song. He turned his back to her and began to walk. The path stretched before him, upward, winding, steep. Behind him, he heard no footsteps, no whisper, no breath, only silence. But within that silence was everything. He kept his eyes forward, his hands tight around the lyre, his heart louder than ever, beating a rhythm older than grief. Upward, step by step, toward the light. The ascent. The tunnel rose gently ahead of him, like a forgotten riverbed carved into the bones of the world. Its walls pulsed with the memory of voices, too faint to understand. The air, cold but thinning. Orpheus walked. Each footstep was soft, each breath deliberate, and behind him, though he did not dare look, he felt her. Eurydice. Not as she had been in death, still and distant, but as she had been in life, present, the nearness of her maid, the silence. He could not hear her steps, but he felt them, like the soundless beat of wings. His heart rose slowly, with the slope of the path. There was no day or night in the underworld, only a dimness, like twilight, waiting to end. But ahead, now, there was something new, a glow, faint, thin as breath on glass, the light of the living world, soft and pale, waiting. He walked slowly, for to rush would be to risk. The rule rang in his mind, clear, simple, absolute. Do not look back, not for a whisper, not for a doubt, not for love. Behind him, she followed, quiet as a memory, close, enough to touch, but untouchable. He remembered her laughter, the shape of her mouth when she whispered, the warmth of her fingers when they brushed his wrist. But he kept his eyes forward. He thought of the forest, the sound of wind through pine, the hush of late afternoon. He thought of the stream where they once sat, the way the sky turned orange when the sun slipped behind the hill. He thought of her voice and tried to remember it clearly, not as a memory, but as something he would hear again. And still, the silence behind him, was she still there? His mind began to ache with the weight of the question. What if she had stumbled? What if she had faded? What if he was walking alone again, chasing only shadow? No, he couldn't think that way. One step, and another. The glow ahead grew stronger, washing the tunnel in soft color. Stone gave way to earth. Roots reached down from the ceiling, like fingers welcoming him back. And still, no sound. He longed to hear her breath, to hear the small scuff of her sandal behind him. Anything. His fingers clenched the lyre, his jaw tightened. The light ahead grew brighter still. He could see the arch now, the opening back into the world of sky and birdsong. Just a few steps more, just a few more moments, but then a sound behind him, soft, like the faintest intake of breath, so quiet. It could have been nothing, or everything. He froze. His whole body ached with the urge to turn, to see, to know. He closed his eyes. The silence stretched, longer than it should. Was she still there? Was she still following? Was she still his? The light touched his face, and in that final instant, when the living world was just a step away, Orpheus, driven not by doubt, but by love, turned slowly, gently, only his head, and there she was, Eurydice, eyes wide, hand reaching forward, but already fading, like mist burned away by morning sun. Her mouth formed his name, but no sound came, and then she was gone. The second silence. There was no sound, not even his breath, not even the strings beneath his fingers, only the soft hum of the earth, and the cold where she had been. Orpheus stood still. The light of the world, wrapping around him like water too bright to bear. She was gone again, but not as before. Not lying in grass with still hands and closed eyes. This time, she had been reaching, alive, so close he could almost feel the warmth of her breath, and then nothing. The silence was different now, not the peaceful quiet of the forest, not the gentle hush between notes, but a hollow, quiet, a ringing absence, an ache that spread through bone and thought alike. He stepped out into the daylight. The sky above was soft blue, scattered with clouds. The trees swayed in the wind, unaware of what had happened beneath their roots. Birds called. The river sang. But to Orpheus, the world felt too loud, too bright, too alive. He walked not quickly, not with purpose, simply walked back through the woods, past the fields where she had once laughed, past the stones where they had sat, shoulder to shoulder in the sun. The forest welcomed him, but with caution, as if it, too, sensed what had changed. The animals kept their distance. The breeze did not dance. Even the leaves fell silently. Now, he returned to the cottage, its walls unchanged, his bed unmade, her garland still resting on the windowsill. He sat in the doorway, the lyre in his lap. He touched its strings. They did not sing. He tried again. A soft sound rose, but it felt distant, as if it belonged to someone else. So he stopped, and let the silence return. But this silence was not cruel. It did not mock or punish. It simply was a space too wide for song, a quiet too deep for thought. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he imagined her beside him, not as she had been at the end, but as she had been in the beginning, smiling without words, fingers in the tall grass, head tilted to the sky. He let the image stay. He did not chase it. He did not cry. Instead, he breathed in and out, and in again, letting time pass without shape, letting the world return at its own slow pace. And in that stillness, where grief met peace, Orpheus began to understand. Some things are not meant to be changed. Some melodies must end, and in their ending, they leave behind a silence full of memory. The last song. Days passed, like feathers floating down a river. Not counted, not named, simply gone. Orpheus lived quietly. He did not speak to the villagers who came looking for music. He did not return to the paths where they had walked together. He did not seek the stars. He simply existed, and the world allowed him to do so. He rose with the sun, sat by the window, and watched light shift through the leaves. He ate only what the forest gave, drank only from the stream, and when the mood stirred gently in his chest, like a bird stretching its wings within, he picked up the lyre again, not to play, not yet, just to hold it, to feel its weight, its stillness, to remember. The first note came one morning, as a breeze swept gently through the trees. It was a simple sound, nothing grand, just one note, warm and low, like the echo of a name long whispered Dot, then another, and another. A slow return, not to joy, not to sorrow, but to balance. To presence. He did not play as he once had, not to move the world, not to charm the gods. He played to remember what was beautiful, to give form to the quiet places in his heart, where Eurydice still lived, not in voice, not in touch, but in presence. Her laugh existed now, in a trill of high strings, her footsteps in the soft rhythm beneath the melody, her breath in the space between phrases, and though he could not see her, he did not need to. She was not lost, not truly, not when her memory bloomed through the music, not when her silence still shaped the song. And so, Orpheus played, each day, each evening, sometimes for the trees, sometimes for no one at all, sometimes for the ghost of a smile he could still feel just over his shoulder. The forest began to stir again. Birds came closer. Deer listened, without fear. The wind, once cautious, began to carry his song through the branches, and with each note, he gave a little more of himself back to the world, not forgetting, never forgetting, but living again, not as before, not with open laughter or reckless hope, but with quiet understanding that some love does not end. It changes shape, it deepens, it becomes part of the silence we carry, and the music we make from it. Sleep and silence. There came a time when even the music grew quiet, not because it was lost, but because it had done its work. The lyre rested beside the door now, strings still, but full of stories. Orpheus no longer played every day. He didn't need to. He would sit for hours beneath the same tree where they once met, watching the shadows stretch and gather. The sun would move across the sky, casting golden light through the leaves, and Orpheus would listen to the wind, to the stream, to the silence. And within that silence, he heard her, not her voice, not her footsteps, but the feeling of her calm and constant. Like moonlight across still water, the forest had changed to Dot. Where once there was stillness, there was now balance. The birds sang again, but softly. The branches swayed, but gently. The flowers opened in the morning as if to greet the music that still lived in the air. And Orpheus, who had once searched the depths of the world for a single soul, now found her in everything, in the sound of leaves brushing against one another, in the hush before the rain, in the warmth of the earth beneath his bare feet. He did not speak much, and when he did, his words were quiet, like notes that had forgotten how to shout. People still came, sometimes, to hear him play. He would smile, nod, and let the strings speak for him. They never asked questions. They simply listened, and when the music ended, they left in silence, changed in a way they could not name. One evening, as the last light of day fell through the trees, Orpheus lay on the soft moss near. The stream. His eyes were closed, his breath deep. Above him the sky deepened into blue. Around him, the world leaned into stillness. He did not play that night. He did not sing. He simply let the silence rise and carry him into the memory of love, into the arms of quiet, into the place where dreams begin. And in the dark, the stars blinked gently overhead, like notes on a page not yet written, and the forest, soft and endless, sang him to sleep.